finding ways of bringing ideas from social science and humanities to bear in general within the field of information studies, and then also specifically of finding ways that those things can be used with some of the traditional disciplinary questions within library and information science, the traditional core of our school. And in this case, by taking some of these ideas from a kind of traditional area of information seeking and use, and how people find information, but bringing ideas from from sociology and ethnographic studies to see what people actually do. But I think there are some powerful ways there in your research that you're showing how those traditions can inform each other. And the other way, of course, now this talk is co-sponsored with the Digital Humanities Lab, and I'm pleased to acknowledge that SOAS's interim dean, Wusab Jean, who recently completed his term as interim dean 2 days ago. One of the nice things that he did for the group last semester was agree to set some money aside in addition to our usual activities to do some speakers jointly with the Digital Humanities Lab. So I'm pleased that Anabel is here in that series. I think we see also so much of Digital Humanities is concerned with evangelizing the technology. And in the research that Anabel is going to be presenting today, we also see how scholarly research that's well grounded in social science practices can be applied to the humanities to understand not just the potentials and the appeal of digital environments, but also to do some kind of serious evaluation of how they work and how they interact with traditional kinds of scholarly practice. I should also just tell you 2 more things while we're here. One of them is that we will be having a roundtable tomorrow from 12:30 till 2 with Anabel downstairs in the Digital Humanities Lab to discuss this question specifically related to how these areas of knowledge fit in the iSchool environment and how social sciences can align with those practices. The other one is that after the talk we will be walking, I'd say about 7 minutes to my house, where you'll have a chance to drink my wonderfully handcrafted cocktails while conversing with Anabel for an hour or so. So we'll be following with an informal cocktail reception. And with that, over to you, Anabel.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. Does the microphone actually work? Can you hear me well? Okay. I don't hear myself, but it's fantastic. So thank you so much, Tom, for that wonderful introduction. I must say, I sort of bribed him, or I will thank him for that amazing introduction by giving you a copy of my book. So if anybody's interested in taking a look, Tom has now a copy, Technology and Society, Social Networks, Power, and Inequality. And I do want to thank everybody for having me here, in particular the DH Lab, the Social Studies of Information Group, and the School of Information Studies. And it is really exciting, although this morning before my alarm clock went off, I must say that I did have sort of this short impulse to just press the snooze button, but I knew I wasn't allowed to do that. I had to get up, shower, and rush off. So it is really great to be here. If at any point I don't make sense, I will just sort of assume that it is because I've been awake way too long. But I wanted to also say that in terms of my talk, I've tried to make this a little bit go beyond a single study. So what I'm trying to outline here is rather a research agenda. So it's a domain of understanding and study that in some ways overlaps between what I call the traditional humanities, although I don't think that actually exists. Sort of the new digital humanities, which again, I think there's been sufficient discussion to say that it doesn't exist either, and information studies. So this is really what sort of my goal is. And I want to acknowledge first some of my collaborators back at Western, at GISES in Germany, as well as some of my funding agencies. So this is the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, as well as design and tools. So it's really, the beginning is really more the foundational work, the theories, two specific studies, and then bringing it back to a discussion as to whether or not can we design for things like serendipity, and how does that intersect with the scholarly practices of humanists and digital humanists. So much of the research that we encounter deals with information and tends to look at linear models of information search. So if we look at a classical model in information science here, often the notion is that we have somebody, a person who's seeking for very specific information, examines the domain, finds the information, and through that information can then close a knowledge gap to solve a problem. Now, if we look more closely at these models, we will observe that at the beginning of the problem statement, we often have something called exploration or sort of a need for more discovery. But the majority of these models overall tend to rather be narrowly focused because the exploration part tends to be, rather short within that. Recently, though, a number of studies and frameworks have suggested that not all information individuals encounter is through goal-oriented search, but rather that individuals often find information and connect with people accidentally without purposefully looking. Now, one of my favorite studies on that is by Pálsdóttir in Iceland, and you sort of wonder, well, what does the Icelandic, context have to do with all of this? But Pálsdóttir, she examined how people seek for health information, and what was really interesting about her work is that she realized that most of the information that people found that was health-related was accidental. So it wasn't really as if I was thinking, oh, I'm feeling really sick, I need to find information about this. Rather, it was through being, integrated in rich information environments, either on the web or through digital resources or through print resources, that she found people would often stumble open information that was health-related and relevant to their work or to their lives. The other thing that Pálsdóttir found is that those who seek information are also the ones who stumble the most open information. So there seems to be some kind of a tendency here for a specific group of people to be very open to resources and to a wide range of resources. So this is where I'm starting to sort of think, well, maybe there's something here about the stumbling open information that is so important that we're not thinking enough about because of our tendency to focus on specifics or more cognitive models of information seeking. So one of the definitions that we're proposing then for serendipity, for this encountering information, is chance encounters with information, objects, or people that lead to fortuitous outcomes. So important notice that in this definition, there is an outcome that comes out of the finding of information. So for those of you who are not in information science, the use of information, so what we do with information, is an important aspect of information science. So it's not just about encountering information, but rather what can people do with that information, how does it affect their everyday lives. So the other important thing that I'd like to note here is that there are a wide range of attempts in everyday life, like Bibliomatic, to help serendipity. And Bibliomatic is a really interesting tool in a Toronto library, and you put in a coin, a loonie, we call it, and a book comes out. But what's interesting about Bibliomatic is that you've got no clue, you have no control over what book comes out. So it's rather sort of selected for you. So you're sort of surprised in some way in terms of what the topic is, who the author is, what the book could be about. So remember, this is the definition of serendipity that I gave you, and now, of course, I'm going to test you. So if you could quickly take a look at these three stories, and I will ask you to rate each of them, and just sort of look in terms of the definition. Which ones do you think would actually fall under serendipity and which ones wouldn't? going on amongst the scholars as to, well, which of these stories is actually serendipity? Now, if you take a really narrow definition of serendipity, only the third story would fall under serendipity, because serendipity always requires a positive outcome. Now, of course, one of the complexities here is that there's time, and I mean, to make a little bit of advertisement for CASE, the Canadian Association for Information Science, the call for papers for 2015 will be on time. And at the heart of serendipity is the fact that it's hard to say whether something we're encountering right now will at some point in the future have a positive outcome or not. And that's what's really tricky about the definition about the coding. So here in this case, though, we can see that maybe 1 and 2 are more random encounters, whereas the third one is the only one where there was a clear sort of change in thinking or in the perspective. So what I'd like to do next, though, now that we've sort of looked a little bit at the various definitions, is to look at the models that exist in the literature on what serendipity is. And I've given you a handout with a bunch of the resources, simply because I won't have time to really cover everything in detail. But the study comparing the 3 models it has been published in Encyclopedia of Information Science and Technology, and in that study we provide detailed sort of overview of each of the models and compare them across a number of criteria. So I'm going to go through them fairly quickly here, but I'm happy to discuss each of them should there be any questions. So in the first model here by Sandra Erdeles, she outlines a study where she does an experimental design of eliciting an encounter with information. She calls that an information encounter, IE. And the way that she designs her model is that she gets students who are working on an assignment for another class in a lab, and she gets them to do an information search task. And within the context of the information search, they encounter information that is related to their other course. And the question then is, will they follow that lead or not? And so how many of you think students would follow that lead in this context? How many people say yes? Oh my goodness, you should have talked to Sandra before she did the study. Because she did indeed find that most students didn't follow the lead, even though they noticed it. So, I mean, I think that, first of all, I'm going to go over her model quickly, but the reality is that context really matters. And that's something that I think is important for when we design for serendipity. So the context in which a person is, in which you are embedded, matters as to whether you're open to new information or you're not. And I mean, in particular, our second study here will look at Twitter. And I think Twitter is a unique environment in that sense, because if you do go if you are on Twitter, if you're immersed on Twitter, it's because you're not controlling the information. Rather, the information is controlling you in some way, in some sense. Okay, so going back to Erdeles here then, she sort of envisions people noticing something in their environment. And think about libraries. Libraries do an amazing job with this, because often when you go into a library, especially into public libraries, they have this display of randomly selected books that casually, when it's Halloween, they're all about Halloween, and if it's Easter, they're all about painting Easter eggs. And often we will walk through that and we'll think, oh, perfect, this is exactly the book that I needed with my kids, to paint the Easter eggs. And you sort of think it's coincidental, but those books have been carefully put there for a reason. So you go through the environment, you notice something, you stop what you're doing, you switch your attention, you examine the information, you capture the information for future use, and then you return to your original task. So this is the model that Erdeles has proposed for serendipity. Now, what's also interesting about her work is that, similar to Paul Zotier, she says that not all people are similar in their behavior. Rather, she talks about super encounterers and non-encounterers, occasional encounterers, and encounterers. Again, the super encounterers would be people who are seeking out this sort of exposure to new information that they do not control, whereas the non-encounterers would be rather more comfortable in an environment where they control the information and where they can look for information that they need, or where they feel that there's a gap. Now, the second model that I'd like to talk about a little bit is one that I'm most familiar with. This is the serendipity in everyday chance encounters. This is work that I've done myself with Victoria Rubin and Jackie Burkell, and that has been published in Information Research. Now, we sort of natural language, we did a number of queries on things like looking for, stumbling, open, encountering. So we created a very detailed list of terms that we used to query the web for stories that were naturally occurring and we didn't impact in any way, that rather were out there. And surprisingly enough, we did find a wide range of stories that do describe some kind of encounter with information, people, or objects that would change, people's problem solving or their view or perspective on something. So based on this work, we developed our own model of serendipity in everyday life. And you have it on your little handout, but basically the facets that we examined, or that we identified from careful grounded theory coding of these accounts, was that prepared mind was really at the center. Again, think of stories that are out there like how penicillin was discovered. Often, really, the prepared mind is at the center of discovering information that is relevant, because somebody else may see the same information, but they may not notice it or not see its relevance, because you are the only one who can assess how that information plays out, in the context of your own information seeking. So again, I think here that prepared mind for us was really central. And one of the questions we had is, can that prepared mind be coded into tools? Can we predetermine what users' prepared mind is or not? Again, think of recommender systems today. When you go and buy a book, part of the recommender system is doing the prepared mind for you, because if you bought this, it means you may also be interested in something else. So the second part, which is perhaps the most interesting for us as information scientists, is active noticing. So one of the things that we're currently doing is working particularly in that context, because we feel that digital environments can be specifically enhanced to help people notice information that may be important to them. Our sense is that most of our environments in which we interact today are rather poor in terms of really understanding the information needs of users, in terms of finding or encountering information in these environments. So one of the things we're looking at is what we call trigger-rich environments. So can we create environments where there's a number of triggers in the background or in the foreground that can be helpful for identifying different pieces of information? Now, interesting perhaps also in the context of humanists, and digital humanists in particular, is this element of surprise. And that's something that came out in all of our stories, is that for information or for an object or a person to really create a serendipitous encounter, there has to be an emotionality with it. And here, I'm currently conducting a series of user studies looking at user engagement in terms of the notion of flow. Why do people go back to certain environments more than others? So why is it that people, when they're on Twitter, instead of feeling completely overwhelmed and abandoning this kind of really crazy information environment, why do they come back constantly for more? So, and we think that this emotionality, the element of surprise of finding something you either didn't know existed or that you didn't know would be relevant to you is a key element of Twitter usage, because Twitter obviously is created in a social environment where you're connecting to people that in some way are similar to you. So this is where the sociology comes in terms of looking at social networks and homophily. We build those, sort of information or social systems with people that are similar to us, and in the context of academia, of course, these are people that are dealing with similar kinds of questions. So it's not surprising then that the information that will be provided in those environments will be relevant to us, but to some extent it's an element of surprise as we see the information or see a specific article or a specific paper that we haven't seen, then we all of a sudden go, oh, how did I not see this before? Okay, so the last model that I want to talk about today is developed by Macri and Blanford at UCL. So they've taken a somewhat different approach. They focused primarily on making a connection, so more on the cognitive side of serendipity. So for them, serendipity is recognizing the value of a piece of information and being able to predict into the future how that piece of information or that person will potentially affect our solution to a problem. And what's really interesting about their model is that they based it on creative users. And they have a second paper that just came out in JASIS, I think, a month ago, or the pre-publication came out a month ago, where they're looking specifically at, again, this interaction of their model of serendipity with specific digital environments. So if you you're more interested in what is it within digital environments that create certain elements of serendipity, I would highly recommend looking at Stefan Macri's most recent model on this. Okay, so finally here is the model comparison. And I don't really expect you to look at all of the details here, but if you look at it on the left, we have all of the elements that were identified